Thank you, everyone, for joining us on Cloud FM podcast. And this is episode number 50. I'm really appreciated everyone who been in this show and share his journey about Cloud Native. So it's been a special day for me. And it's a special day for my guest as well because Keptn advances to CNCF incubation. And one of the best thing about this show that we're talking to the person who has been the co-founder, co-creator of this tool, Andreas. Thank you very much for joining us. And just share your thoughts on CNCF incubation first and where you're currently at right now.
Well, thank you so much, first of all, for hosting me, for giving me the opportunity. You're right, it's been a major milestone, and I think a lot of projects that start in CNCF or even outside of CNCF, right? You always want to make sure that you are actually making an impact and you're growing it and you are providing value. And I think reaching incubation shows us that we are definitely solving a problem, because otherwise we wouldn't have adoption. B, it seems that people like what we do because we also see people are helping us in kind of expanding Keptn, building new integrations, contributing to Keptn. So that's great. And yeah, it's been a long journey. It's been a couple of years now when we sat together here close to where I am right now in a room, and we were kind of figuring out how can we build better tooling for CI/CD, how can we make this, what's next, and we actually took back then what we had available, and then we figured out, well, there's great tools out there. It's very hard to connect them all, and then with our background of observability, we try to figure out what the role of observability should be in the application lifecycle. And this kind of fast forward to now, this is where Keptn is. Keptn really tries to solve the tool integration problem, right? With our involvement in cloud events and CD events. And as I always like to put it, we are putting observability into the driving seat of your DevOps automation. And happy to be here.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think being in incubation tells you like you are working at a good pace. You're solving the real challenges that the customer and the companies and the enterprises, the small companies are facing. And then having
Mhm.
the incubation tell you like, and I think this is right now is a part we want to be contributing. Here's the GitHub link is listed in the screen,
Mhm.
github.com/captain. So start
Yep.
contributing to it. Like it's been, and I think we are lacking in the CNCF and RV. We're lacking tools to have SRE and DevOps. We
Mhm.
can't have a tool that gives you the both time. Like I think SRE is all about service level objects, service level agreement, objectives, indicators, what those are. We definitely cover in the show today as well. But also the DevOps pipeline, the dev environments, the staging and the production environment. These are the different environment, and all you have the different toolings involved into it, and if a tool can understand those tooling, that's a really enjoyable life for you, because otherwise you have to invest so many time in learning, and it can be a steep learning curve, especially
Mhm.
in the CNCF landscape.
Yeah.
So so let's first try to people who are really new to the Keptn, like what are the different features in it, how you
Mhm.
think about it when you're first starting about this project,
Yep.
and what is the major, like if you talk to the community, what do you think the most selling point of the Keptn,
Mhm.
or the most selling feature of the Keptn?
Yeah. The question is, shall I talk about it or shall I show something? What do you say?
Yes, absolutely. You just talk about it as well, and if you show something, that could be really awesome.
Then let me show something, because I have, let me share my screen here. Share screen, and let's see, I'm sharing this screen here. Now I'm moving you away because I think we know how we look like. Here we go. Um, I think this is what made us really popular. At the core of Keptn, we, as you said, right, we're looking at what the industry refers to as SLOs, service level objectives. I think we have our little spin on service level objectives, because what we are basically doing at the core of Keptn, we are integrating with your observability tool. In most cases, this might be a Prometheus, could be a Dynatrace, a Datadog, a New Relic, a Splunk, wherever you get your observability from. But we thought, what we do as an industry, every time when we have a new build, every time when we do a deployment, we always validate, right? Is this a good deployment? Is it still accessible from the outside world? Does it use enough memory or not enough memory, or what's happening right now? Does it crash anything? So typical as humans, we then always look at certain metrics, or as the world calls it, SLI, service level indicators. And then we are comparing them against our expectation. Our expectation is either a certain threshold that we don't want to cross, like we should not be slower than a certain millisecond amount, or maybe it shouldn't get worse than before. Then it's classical regression detection by looking at historical data. And this is exactly what we do with Keptn at the core. So what you see here is what we call the heat map. Every column here is kind of representing an evaluation that Keptn did for me in the past. So every time Keptn orchestrates automation, then as a keystone or a key task, as we call it, we automatically validate. So what I have here, my last evaluation, as you can see, I have a list of SLIs metrics. You can see them here: aptex, load average, blah, blah, blah. There's different metrics, CPU, memory. And then every metric was pulled in from my observability platform, was evaluated against a threshold, and then it gets a grading, yellow, green, or red. And then on the top, we do a top score. If I scroll down, you can actually see the raw values behind the scenes. So in my case, I can see which SLIs, which metrics were retrieved for a particular time frame. So every time you ask Keptn to evaluate a system, you also need to give it a time frame. This could be the time frame of the deployment in a production environment, and you maybe waited 10 minutes for real traffic to come in. Or in a pre-prod environment, you may execute some tests, and then you say, please analyze the testing time frame. So in my case, I had here 30 minutes. But it basically then pulls in the data, the values, and then it analyzes it against the pass and the warning criteria you can specify. And you can see here it immediately says, does this particular SLI meet your criteria or not? And depending on that, you get a score. And then on the top, it then calculates a total score that we normalize to a value between 0 and 100. So that means every time you evaluate, you get a clear indicator saying green, yellow, or red. And why is this important, and why do people get excited about this? Because I think a lot of people over the years have invested in automated build, in automated deployments maybe already. Some maybe already some automated testing and also some performance testing. But where a lot of people have fallen short, and this is why this is kind of the first level into Keptn, is the automated validation of your environment based on indicators that you define as this is a healthy environment. Right? And at the core, this is really what this is all about. And then we bake this into something much bigger. So what you see here is just the evaluation piece, but we can bake this into much bigger projects. So we typically see people start with just the validation or release validation, but then you may have scenarios where you are using, like I have a rollout example here. So Argo rollout that I'm using, I can use Keptn to do multi-stage. I can let Keptn do orchestrate multi-stage delivery. And what multi-stage means, you can see I have staging, I have production. This is our visualization of what Keptn is doing, and behind the scenes, we really are executing so-called sequences, or we're orchestrating them. So I'm moving around here a little bit, but you can see here I have staging, and in staging, my Keptn, whenever I tell Keptn there's something new for you to do. Let's say I built a new container, I pushed it to a registry, and that registry then triggered a sequence in Keptn. Keptn will then execute certain tasks. And then a key part of it, if I scroll down, you can see it's doing a lot of things: configuring my monitoring, deploying, validating, releasing, running some tests, and then it's evaluating, coming back to the core component. So yeah, I think what got people excited though in the beginning is definitely the SLO piece, because we really bring a core concept of site reliability engineering to the cloud native world as an easy to use capability. But then we really center and provide orchestration around SLOs. And here, what I really like, right, we are really integrating with all of these tools, like Argo, right? We have Argo, we integrate with Argo, we integrate with Flux, with Jenkins. The point is, we don't want to replace these tools because these are all great tools and they're doing a great job. But what is really hard to do is connecting them all together and then making automated decisions based on observability. And that's really what we bring to the table. So we connect all of your tools, we orchestrate them in a sequence. We're using also a standard protocol or standard events, cloud native events, CD events, and then we always go back to your observability platform and validate for you.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. And that I think that, like, as you're chilling, like people are thinking about the automated build, the automated deployment. But how do we prevent a small bug for going into the production? So we need some kind of indicator. Like I can push my app into the, let's say, a staging environment. Then I put them under a load test of 10,000 requests at a time, and
Mhm.
to see the matrix, like how does it responding into the
Mhm.
CPU, the RAM spikes, how the database is happening, and that is actually the heat map, the evaluation part.
Yeah,
That I think
exactly.
that's really I like about, because
Um,
I need to understand, like if I putting something to production, like
yeah,
how should it behave.
yeah,
So
exactly. And that's I mean, one thing we learned, right, when we started with Keptn, we wanted to make sure that everything we do is as close as possible to everything is code, right? We wanted to make sure that this actually scales. So in the beginning, because some people may ask, so behind the scenes, well, how do you define all of this? And behind the scenes, you can define your SLIs and your SLOs in YAML that you put into a config repo that Keptn uses behind the scenes. So like you can see here, the SLOs are defined. We also visualize it here in the UI. But really what it is, if I go quickly back behind all of these projects, and I'm looking now, let's say let's look at the demo rollup project that I had earlier. So if I look at this here, then I have a Git repository, can be any type of Git. And then I go to my staging branch. And in staging, I have my simple node service. And in here, I have my SLO definition. So SLOs here really say, okay, what type of metric, um, response time, SLI, and then your criteria, pass, warning. You can also give different weights. I didn't mention this earlier. I think this is also really important what we learned. Not every metric is equal. Right? There are certain things that might be more important for you. And what you can also specify, and I'm just editing, you could also say this is not weight two, but you could say key equals true. Key means it's a key criteria. If this is not met, then I don't care about the rest. An example would be if you're pulling in SLIs, let's say the number of detected security vulnerabilities. Security is really important for everyone, right? And if you have tools that detect security vulnerabilities, and then you have, let's say, a way to extract this through Prometheus or Dynatrace or other tools, then you can add this into your list and say, I don't, performance is important, throughput is important, but honestly, if I have a security vulnerability, critical one, then I don't want to go further. So you can specify this. So as you can see here, you specify your SLIs, a metric, an indicator, and then the criteria. Now the question is, where does the data really come from? And this is where, in my case, I'm using Dynatrace as my observability platform. So I have a Dynatrace subfolder. If you would have Prometheus, you would have a Prometheus subfolder here. And then you have an SLI YAML where you specify the query language of the target tool. And this is also the nice thing. We actually separated the definition of how I get the data to what I'm expecting from that data. And the reason why this is important is, right, I, as an architect, as a developer, I may know that I have certain response time and throughput and memory objectives, but maybe I don't control how this data gets collected. Maybe another team is responsible for observability, and they use, maybe they use Prometheus, but maybe they use Datadog, or maybe New Relic or Dynatrace. And so we are separating these two things so that one tool can define how to query that data, and then another team, or the team that is responsible for defining their objectives, can then, independently of the monitoring tool behind the scenes, specify the pass and warning criteria. I think this is also very important, right? And the last thing I want to say here, this is really, I think this works extremely well, but we also know, while Kubernetes has been around for a while, there's still a lot of people that are new to this, and some of them are afraid of touching config files like this. And this is why what we have also allowed our customers to do, and with our customers, and now I'm talking specifically about the Dynatrace community, and I know that Jürgen, who, by the way, I want to say a big thank you to Jürgen Etzelsdorfer, who was a founding member of Keptn as well, and he since moved on to Microsoft, is now an advocate there, which is great. But he, but what we learned is we need to make this easier, right? We need to make this easier because some people are just not comfortable with YAMLs. And so for our Dynatrace customers, and I know that this is why I brought up Jürgen, Jürgen also started implementing something like this for Grafana and Elastic. So you can not only configure these things as YAML, but in our case, you can also configure this by just using a dashboard. You can create a dashboard. Now, this is a Dynatrace dashboard. That means I can use Keptn and say, this is my Dynatrace dashboard that defines the metrics that I'm interested in. I can specify the pass and the warning definitions on the dashboard. So I kind of visually start defining and getting comfortable with what I would normally manually analyze. But then I say, Keptn, you take this dashboard. This is your input definition. Right? And I think this is what we saw, at least in our Dynatrace community. This led to a much faster adoption because we reduced the hurdle of having people to type in queries in YAML, even though I think the YAML-based approach is the one that you want to take once you really start to scale this out and push it as far left as possible to engineering.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I think the as you mentioned during the demos, like we have SLIs, SLO.YAML file, we have a shipyard YAML file,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the all the idea behind is that is the separation of concern between, like, in the if I take the example of the multi in the delivery pipeline at different stages, we can have all these things like what should I use in a build stage that is written in the shipyard YAML file,
Mm-hmm.
and who can do what is telling the captain is telling, like, say, Helm chart to create this thing. Our captain is connecting with Argo CD or Litmus Chaos to do the
Mm-hmm.
testing. So I think that's a really easier approach for the teams. Like, you have definition written in one file, and if you want, let's say, to swap Dynatrace with Prometheus, you can
Yeah,
go into the shipyard.yaml file and you just change the field in there and everything stays the same. And I
yeah,
think that is really being the hurdle for me, at least. Like, if we
and
have
and
a
and
different,
mm, go ahead. Sorry.
so that's really hurdle for me. Like, in the past, we have a same DevOps pipeline, and we want to use the same pipeline in a different environment. But I need to change, let's say, the testing tool,
Mm-hmm.
but everything stays the same. But
Yeah,
I have to maintain another DevOps pipeline because I don't reuse that pipeline.
yeah,
But in the Dynatrace, I can see these. We have a shipyard YAML file, the SLIs, SLO YAML. These are the definitions, and where these things are operating or implementing are in a different stage. So that I see the selling point of in itself. And
yeah.
also the one thing, or to be like, I'm interesting to know, like, tell us, like, you in the Dynatrace web dashboard. Let's say if somebody come up with their own matrix of SLI YAML that
Mm-hmm.
is already not defined everywhere. So do they build that one and then it deploy it on, and then it's also fetching those matrices as well. Like, I want to see, like, in the cloud environment how the AWS Lambda is operating or other services operating, but I want to have my own matrix in there, not just these defined by. So how what are the different methodologies of doing this?
Yeah, there's multiple options that you have. So first of all, you could, let's assume, you brought up, if we stay with Dynatrace, if Dynatrace is your observability platform of choice, then you can push additional metrics from other sources to Dynatrace, and then Dynatrace you just chart this metric here, right? For instance, you mentioned AWS Lambda. We have a native integration where we pull in Lambda metrics. You can also push any external metrics to Dynatrace through an API, and then you have everything in one tool. And then on the Keptn side, you basically just say, hey, analyze this dashboard, or use the YAML approach, and in the YAML you can now also use a query to query, let's say, the Lambda metric. But the other option that you have, and I think this is also coming back to the separation of concerns, we have, if you look at this here, right, this is kind of the sequence for the evaluation. And then what the evaluation actually does, the so-called lighthouse service, is really the magician behind the scenes. The lighthouse service is the one that reads the SLO and then basically says, hey, I need these metrics because they are defined in the SLO. So who can deliver me the values of these metrics for a particular environment, for a particular time frame? And it basically sends a so-called get SLI event, and then your we call them SLI provider or your observability platform of choice is then responding and say, hey, here are the metrics that you're asking for. Which means what you could do is you can also have you can connect different data sources to Keptn as well, which is also great, right? You may want to we query for one project, you have Prometheus as your data source. For the other one, you may want to go straight to AWS CloudWatch, right? Because maybe that's what it is, right? Because in a large organization, I'm pretty sure you have different teams that are working with different technology stacks, and that means they also make their own choices about the observability platform. And therefore, we allow you per project actually in Keptn right now to specify what is the data source, what is the SLI provider. Right? And you can switch, just as you can switch testing tools, you can also specify which monitoring observability platform is providing the metrics, which is really cool.
Yes, absolutely. And I think another use case that I'm looking at, like if we have a build stage history or report, like I have done 17 different deployments. This is my entire dashboard. And in deployment one, we break this service. In deployment two, I break this service. In deployment three, I break this service. Based on those build process, we can actually make some kind of evaluation. Like if this service is breaking 5 times build stage or in a production environment, I can slack a notification and tell the team member that this is the service is breaking too much. Let's do something about that.
Exactly, yeah. And I think for this, it's a great point. Um, you can, and this is what I wanted to say earlier, because you said you're a big fan of our separation of concerns with the shipyard file, where we specify the process, but in the process itself, right, this is what we call the shipyard, and we don't call it the process, we call it the sequences of tasks like Monaco, deployment, validate, release, test. And what we do here is, as you can see or not see maybe, we don't have any tool specification, because exactly that's the core of Keptn. It's an event-driven system. Keptn is orchestrating the sequences of tasks. It is sending events, and then you can have one or multiple tools subscribe to certain events, which brings me to the point that you just made. I can go in here under settings and under integrations, where you can see these are, we call them Keptn services, where you can install certain integrations that we have. For instance, this is where the Lighthouse service comes in. There's the Helm service, the Argo, Dynatrace, Monaco, Locust, Job Executor. So we have certain services that are basically kind of, you install it on a target environment, and they then connect to Keptn and say, I'm interested in certain events. So it's basically an event subscription model. What I want to say here to your example with Slack, how would you integrate Slack with Keptn? Well, one option would be to write your own Slack integration, but what we have done over the years and what we've learned, we learned we need to make this super easy. So one of the services that comes with Keptn is a so-called webhook service. And you can, as the name implies, I guess, you can add a subscription. And in your example, you could say, hey, if there is a deployment that is finished in a particular stage, let's say production, for a particular service that I might be responsible for, then I want to post a message to, I think it's api.slack.com, right? And blah blah blah. And then you just send. So you can subscribe a webhook to an event. And there's actually different ways of how we do it. You can, as you can see here, for every task, for every event, or let's say really for every task, like a deployment, like an approval, evaluation, there's 3 types of events. There's a triggered. So initially, Keptn sends a so-called triggered event saying, I need somebody that can do a deployment. Again, to your point, you may start with Jenkins, but then you maybe later you say, I'm switching from Jenkins to GitHub or GitLab, and therefore I'm just changing the event subscription. So that means you can also do a webhook on triggered, which means triggering typically means I want some external tool to do something active, right? I'm triggering something and then I'm expecting also a status in return. And this is why what you can do here, or if you scroll down, you can actually say, hey, what do you want me to do? Do you want to send a start event automatically and a finished event? Because the way Keptn keeps track of is an external tool actually doing something and when is it finished, it expects that external tool to respond with, yes, I'm starting, I'm doing my job now, and in the end also finished. And for webhooks, we also give you all the options, right? You can say, hey, I'm handling a deployment. I'm doing this for you, right? This might be, let's say, this could be your myjenkins.com, right? And you're sending it over, and then you say, hey, I'm sending the started event automatically because I know Jenkins will do its job right away, but I'm waiting for Jenkins to call me back when it's done because I don't know how long Jenkins takes, maybe an hour, maybe 10 minutes, maybe a minute, maybe an hour. So also for webhooks, we give you different options, which is really great. So you can handle on triggers, you can become active. You can also say, I'm interested every time some other tool is starting something and then I want to send a notification, right? So you're extremely flexible here with what we're providing with the integrations.
Yes, absolutely. And I think on this point, we should try to like, is Captain is not just notifying you, but it's a great tool because it's just doing the remediation itself. Like you define, like if let's say if your deployment is failing and you come up with the 2 pods and you find like something happening to your application, let's go out and scale your pod to 2 to 4, and that's
Yeah.
automatically happened to you, and you just submit a file to Keptn, and Keptn just automatically creates a new file, and then it's re-evaluate those heat map, like
Yeah.
how is this the issues has been solved, and if it is
Yeah.
solved, that's wonderful. Otherwise, they give you the notification. So I think not the notification in itself, because people telling you, oh, wonderful, people are saying this tool is telling me like there's so many bad things I'm doing, but do is able to tell me how I can fix those. So
Mm-hmm.
is a great addition to on that part as well.
Yeah.
And also
Yeah.
during the discussion, I think you mentioned the eventing part as well, and I think that's
Mm-hmm.
really core into the what's really, I want you to elaborate more on the eventing part, because I think
Mm-hmm.
in the past, well, how the build was architecture, like if you can set up a build and build takes 1 hours, you do nothing and just to wait to finish that build and then do the next step. But that's eventing mechanism, and the calls behind the scene is asynchronous. And let's say you hit a call and it's telling like I need to deploy the Helm charts, and don't wait for it, but it's on the parallel you can do other things as well, and when it's finished it's telling you that I'm done with it by notifying you. Now let's do the
Definitely.
other things as well. So I think the eventing is really a core into the Keptn project as well. So I want to elaborate more on this, because you in the eventing I can see that the Keptn is heavily investing in the eventing. Everything done behind the scenes is triggered by eventing.
Exactly. That's what it is. Before I go into this, I want to make one thing clear though, and I think this was a misconception from the beginning, because our narrative was always Keptn deploys, Keptn notifies. Keptn itself doesn't deploy. Keptn is triggering a tool through an event that can actually do the deployment, right? I just want to make sure that people understand Keptn itself is not a build tool, it's not a deployment tool, it's not a testing tool, it's not a monitoring tool. Keptn orchestrates all of these tools by executing and orchestrating what we call sequences of tasks. The sequences of tasks are explained or described as we see here in what we call the shipyard, right? And then now to really answer your question, we're using events. So you're specifying sequences, like you have a delivery sequence, and that delivery sequence has certain tasks that you want Keptn to then orchestrate. So now let's take staging delivery. How would I tell Keptn to start this? I would do this by sending an event to Keptn. So Keptn itself is also triggered through the same eventing mechanism. Let's go back to the bridge here. We call this the Keptn bridge. You can see here the delivery sequence. And if you, we also show all of the events here. There's a little icon, the event payload. So initially, I kicked off, and you can actually see this here, Andy, while preparing for KubeCon. I think this was the demo environment that I used back in May for KubeCon. But the point is, you can, from your, let's say, from your CI, let's say you're using Jenkins and you're building your container, you're pushing it to a registry, and then Jenkins can send this event to Keptn, saying, Keptn, I want to trigger the delivery sequence in staging. It is for this project, it's for this service, and again, stage, it's duplicated, but that's what it is. So with this, Keptn knows, okay, Andy wants to trigger something in the delivery demo project, delivery demo. For the service TNT Acer, I can have multiple services defined, and he wants to start this in staging. And the sequence he wants to trigger is called delivery. So what Keptn then does, it goes into the Git repository behind the scenes, says, staging, delivery. That's the sequence Andy wants to execute. So the first thing is Monaco, then deployment with some additional properties, then validate with some properties, then release, then test, and so on. Now let's have a look at how this actually looks like. If I go back here, I trigger this sequence. I say for which project I want to trigger what type of sequence. I can give additional metadata like labels. Labels is just things like who am I, build ID, maybe a link back to your tool that you're calling. Now you can also add additional config data because maybe that sequence somewhere needs some additional data from the outside, some well-defined data, like the image that you want to deploy, right? This could be the image that Jenkins put into the registry. So what Keptn does with it, it takes this initial event, looks at the sequence, and then the first thing it does, remember, Monaco, that was the first thing in the task definition. So what it does, it sends out an event and says, hey, this is all the event that all the data that I have so far, that the one that triggered initially that sequence gave me. And I know that I now need to trigger the Monaco event. So this is now the cloud event that basically tells that tool that subscribes to it what to do. And now the question is, who is handling Monaco? In my case, I have a service that is subscribing for the event Monaco triggered because it can handle it. Monaco stands for monitoring as code. So this then configures my monitoring. The Monaco itself, like every tool that participates in a Keptn sequence, needs to remember what I said earlier. It needs to respond back initially with a started event so that Keptn can keep track of state. And when it's finished, it sends back a finished event, this here, and the finished event needs to have a status, succeeded or failed. So if it's failed, it would stop here, but you can actually then also branch off and you can say, if it's failing, then I want to do another sequence that maybe notifies somebody. In my case, it's successful, which means it goes into the next task, which is the deployment task. So what it does here, it looks at all the information that it already has collected. It's kind of like a trace from everything that happened so far, and now says, I need to trigger the deployment task. And then in my case, what do I have here? I have an integration that we built, Helm service, that is then basically saying, okay, I can deploy and I have enough information to find the Helm chart to do this and this and this. Started, finished, and so on, and then the evaluation kicks in. So it goes on and on like this. But this is really the beauty of it. Maybe one last thing here, because that's important. The Helm service is obviously deploying And you would, maybe you would call a Jenkins pipeline to deploy, maybe you would call something else. The point with the deployment here is the tool that actually deploys is also supposed to then respond back with a finished event, so deployment finished, hopefully with successful, but then also additionally things like what is the URL of that service that was just deployed. Now, why is this interesting and why is this important? Because you may want to run a test afterwards, and this test needs a URL to test against. And this would then be taken as an input. All right. So that's kind of that's really the idea here on how the eventing works. And maybe I think I should have probably picked this one because I believe in this particular um, example here, right? This is exactly the deployment happens, and then there's a test step. I'm using locust service, and the locust service actually retrieves again as input the URL of the deployment that happened earlier. And this can then be taken by the testing script to say, okay, I'm executing a particular test script that was uploaded to Git repository behind the scenes that Keptn holds. And here is, for instance, the service URL to test against, because that's the URL that the deployment tool told me that it deployed to.
Yes, absolutely, and that's all the eventing part of it. And also, I think before it's a question like, do you, when is first when you subscribe to the event, you notify the captain that it's now subscribed to the event now. During the notification part, before the sequence, when the notification start and when this event service send back the notification that this is done, or the captain is also watching intermediate situation as well, or just watching the first and starting and ending part between the deployment or anything.
So what it does is it basically waits until at least one service says it started. Okay, so at least one service needs to, otherwise at some point it runs into a timeout. We don't wait
Yes.
forever. Also, what you can see here, that's an interesting one. Here we actually have two services that are subscribed to it. I have the Helm service and the Argo service. So you can also have multiple tools that are basically saying, I'm doing something. And in this case, Keptn is then waiting until all of the tools are reporting back that they're finished. So we're doing state management here. We make sure that all the tools are getting a chance to finish. Now, there's a couple of things that I know our user community wants us to improve. There's things like configurable timeouts. How long do you want to wait? Right, there's an option. Also, what we already have implemented, this is also nice. If a tool is doing a long running job, right? Go back to, let's say, maybe Jenkins, and Jenkins runs for a while until everything is deployed. You can also give send not only a started and a finished event, you can also send that. So I think it's called an update or progress event, where you can say, hey, I'm still here, right? I'm still here. That's also important. But yeah, so these are things I think people have asked for is better timeout management, because right now I think there's a global timeout that you can set on how long Keptn is waiting for a task to be started by a tool. I think from a retry perspective, what if something fails? Right now we fail the sequence, but people have also asked for maybe retrying things. Right? So this is stuff we have in the backlog, but we also need to figure out, and I think this is the next major milestone from a Keptn perspective. We've learned a lot on what Keptn, what people get excited about in Keptn, the SLO capability, the automated validation, and so we are currently also thinking about where the future is heading, and we really want to focus on things that bring true value to our community, and that also means, right, if you focus on one thing, we may not do certain other things, at least not right now, which makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. I think we discussed so much a lot, and now the question people came into mind, like where the captain is actually running
Mm.
and where the tools are running. It is a question like captain running. I think a captain run in itself, the control plane is running in the Kubernetes cluster,
Exactly. So
and and
yeah, so exactly. So what I have here, right? in my demos, I always use a Linux machine on typically use EC2 or just an Ubuntu. And then Keptn itself runs on Kubernetes. It needs a Kubernetes cluster. Can be Kubernetes, can be OpenShift, can be anything. I'm actually running a K3s lightweight cluster. And as you can see here, if I do this again, right? Actually, let's do this K3s kubectl get pods A actually, then you see everything that is running in my cluster. Then you can see that in this cluster, I have my Keptn namespace with my Keptn specific, my core services. So for instance, API gateway, that's core, secret service, the bridge, that's the UI, remediation approval. These are all Keptn core components. A very important core component, for instance, is the webhook service that I told you about. But then you can also install additional, we call them Keptn services. So kind of native or more tightly integrated services like the Helm service, the Argo service, the Monaco, the Locust, the Dynatrace. These are all additional services I can install in case I really need these type of integrations. And why would I need them? If I, for instance, cannot integrate the tool that I want to integrate with a webhook. Right? That would be one. Another one that is very interesting is what we call the job executor service. This is also a service that you can install, that you can download and install. The job executor service is, as the name maybe implies, is allowing you to react on an event, so to subscribe to an event, but then instead of making a webhook call, deploying a container on that target Kubernetes cluster where you install this one, and kind of think of it like a GitHub action. So we run a container as a Kubernetes job, giving it all the input of the event that Keptn was sending out. And then once the job is done, the job executor service takes care of like the start and finished event. Now, what's important, I think, and this is the question that you wanted to get to, the Keptn control plane. So all of the core components, they are typically installed on some type of Kubernetes cluster, right? Whatever your tooling cluster. But then other tools that you, like for instance, the job executor is a great example. You could have the job executor installed on different Kubernetes clusters, your production cluster, your staging cluster, your dev cluster. And they would all, in the beginning, when they come up, register itself and subscribe to the events and say, hey, Keptn, I'm here and I am in production. So I'm interested in events for production. And then the other job executor service that runs in staging would say, Keptn, I'm the job executor and I'm interested in staging events. And this is how you can use Keptn also multi-cluster to orchestrate sequences that go across stages and then really target the tools in the target environments. Right, in
Yes,
my environment, yeah.
yes, absolutely. And I think all those, like all the control planes, all these things that's running in the Kubernetes cluster, the captains, are there, are you deploying that as part of the Kubernetes CRDs by
Um,
extending the
so we are, that's a good question. So we actually have a project right now, Keptn GitOps operator. So this is most likely, and as you asked earlier, in which direction is Keptn heading? When we started with Keptn initially, we did not think about making all of this configurable through CRDs, right? And as it is today, the Keptn core components, you install Keptn and then you configure Keptn not through CRDs, but you configure it through config files that need to live in the source code repository behind the Keptn project. And this is a thing that we want to address because this was feedback we've received from our users. Why don't you have an operator? Why can I configure Keptn via CRDs? And this is exactly kind of the first approach is the GitOps operator from Thomas Schütz. He's one of our colleagues, where you can really, you can see you have a Keptn instance, a Keptn project, a service, a sequence, a stage, and all of this. This was a great way to get started to think about how Keptn can play in a true GitOps manner. I think what we're currently doing is we're currently thinking about um, how does this really need to look like in core, because right now this is a sandbox project, right? Keptn Sandbox. That means we are it's there. It was great to get feedback, But now we are one of the goals for us for Keptn, the next big milestones is to move towards that direction that Keptn is fully GitOps compliant, meaning you can deploy and configure it just through CRDs. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I think like another question, like I think people might need to think about at this moment, like when there is only the Jenkins, the system is available, we can see all the integration that Jenkins can do. They can integrate with the Maven to test the
Mm.
code. They can integrate with other load performance testing tool or load testing tool or
Mhm.
other secret or configuration management tool, different toolings. We see the Jenkins community grow huge.
Mhm.
And we can see like the Keptn is right now integrating with all of these cloud native tools. And there are more in the roadmap as of today now, or where actually how other do you see in the next time era that more and more these services being into the Keptn marketplace, where we can see all of the favorite Kubernetes projects. We have those eventing mechanism in place in the Keptn project, so we can hook those uh, favorite cloud native projects and do some of the other things. Like I think about the K native or other. Like how you think about like what's going to be happen uh, next few years with the Keptn.
Yeah, so I don't think we will build a lot of integrations because we have a different approach to solving that problem. Because building integrations means somebody needs to maintain all of these integrations, and then we end up with something that we see with other existing tools that you have a lot of integrations, but then they sometimes break, and then they break often because the tools on the other end change. And so coming back to the events again, right? These events here, these are already based on cloud events. But what we are currently actively engaged in is in a project called CD Events. I'm sure you've heard about it, right? CD Events. CD Events is a CDF project, so Continuous Delivery Foundation, where we, and as it says here, it's a common specification for continuous delivery events, which means we're working with them to really standardize on events that kind of allow us to map the life cycle of your applications. I mean, right now, the continuous delivery events, if you think about it, right, they specify continuous deployment events like when an environment is created, when a service is deployed. So there's already some of these events in there that kind of map to something what we are already sending out or consuming. We are working with them because we think the future is specifying well-defined events from the creation of an artifact through its hops into the different stages until it's in production, even until it's retired. And if we have these events and they're standardized, then the integration problem will be solved in a different way because then we and many other tools don't need to build point-to-point integrations. We just agree on a common eventing standard, and then tools that want to do something when, let's say, a service gets deployed, like notifying somebody, can just subscribe to that event. And I don't need to build point-to-point integrations because we are standardizing the events, we're standardizing the APIs basically. And this is the future. This is also when you ask me where is Keptn going, and I think we will see a significant change in Keptn because we want to go full GitOps, we want to go full CD events, we want to standardize all of this, which means there's less of a need for us to build a lot of custom integrations with Keptn because this would defeat the purpose of what we've always been trying to do, defining a standard. Right? That's exactly what we need to do.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's for me at least. It makes so much sense to choose the CD events. Like the
Yeah.
same eventing mechanism that every tooling can do. Like if somebody give you the JSON response, somebody give the YAML response, or somebody give you the scripting response, it's totally a different story. If we come up
Yeah.
with a standard, how the tools is sending back responding for you and how you interact with them with a standard way, I think that's make the integration a lot simpler. In
Yeah.
that way, you don't need to invest a lot of time with what's happening in the ecosystem of that tool.
Yeah.
What's because you do have a one language is to trigger the event and one language to receive the event. So I think that's a great, for me at least, makes sense for me. And everybody have some other ideas or other opinions about this approach. And Andreas is a great person to being tagged with being asked these questions as well. And before I let you go, Andreas, that I think that's the last question from my side, and I think I really love the point thinking about. I see the Captain Lighthouse surveys
Mm-hmm.
that's actually detects the all the what's happening, what's going wrong, all these
Mm-hmm.
kind of things. I'm thinking about, like, I think in the cloud environment, especially the managed Kubernetes clusters, there we see some downtime or the outages in the AWS or the Azure or GCP coming. And other thing, like, I people down the road think about, like, for me AKS is not a good fit, but I started in the AKS, but I want to go to the Azure AKS side. Or thinking about, like, if something happened in the AKS cluster, how do I remediate those issues? How do we able to respond to that issue? How the captain requires a remediation in the
Mm-hmm.
DevOps DevOps SRE world? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you think about those managed clusters and the issues popping up to that? What your thoughts on what is the best way to look about those managed
Mm-hmm.
clusters that are people running in large scales?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I think the problem that you explain or describing is not constrained to managed clusters, because whether you have a managed cluster or whether you manage your infrastructure yourself, things can go down, right? So in the end, the question is really, uh, does Keptn provide an answer to how can we react to a system not being available? And the answer is this is the second big use case that we've always focused on, which is what you see here, right? We are orchestrating a sequence of tasks that is triggered initially by an event that says there's a new version available. Now, on the other side, we can do the same thing. I'm not sure if I have it in here. Remediation, auto remediation. That means you can also trigger a Keptn sequence from a tool that detects that something is wrong. So I come back obviously to Dynatrace because I know Dynatrace pretty well. Dynatrace monitors your systems not only from the inside but also from the outside. We know your end users, and if they no longer can access your systems because AKS or something else is down, then we would create a so-called problem, detect the problem, and then we could either notify people, or what we can do, right? We can again say, hey, Keptn, I want to trigger a remediation sequence in production. So the concept is completely the same. You are defining a sequence of tasks that is executed in response to an event from an outside tool. One event could be there's a new artifact, a new version. The other one could be there's a problem. And then you can specify what should you do, right? Maybe you're scaling up. Maybe you are scaling down. Maybe you're moving things over, right? We had a lot of conversations at KubeCon with people that are looking into tools like Terraform, Crossplane, Pulumi. We can then move things and scale things up, but not only scale up, but scale out and scale over, right? And this is all what we can orchestrate. So exactly, this is what it is. And maybe this is one thing I would have liked to show, because I used this slide. We used this at KubeCon, and kind of brings a little bit the bigger picture. If you don't mind me showing this, and it's also like a nice finishing touch to the whole thing today. So what we are doing with Keptn, right? We are putting SLOs into the driving seat of orchestration. We believe SLOs are there because SLOs allow you to describe what you actually expect the system to be to your consumers. And this is also why I call it the business desired state, because SLOs are not just CPU and memory or response time. What I've learned over the last couple of months, you typically want to specify SLOs as close as possible to your end consumer. Is your system available to the end user? What's the page load time when people are trying to access? Do people actually navigate to your page? Do they buy something? Do they do whatever you want them to do? So you define SLOs to describe your desired state from your application perspective, but then also obviously from the infrastructure perspective. So that's what you do. And then what Keptn does, right? Keptn gets triggered by two types of events. The one thing is when a change is pushed on purpose into the system, meaning a GitOps change, Argo, Jenkins built a new artifact or something, or production alert, something is read. And then, as you've seen me do today, Keptn can either orchestrate a sequence that is focused on the delivery promotion, assess an environment, then trigger the deployment tool, do some testing, evaluate, and then promote in a cycle. Or the other thing is there's a problem in production. Let's assess the situation. Let's then execute and trigger the actions that have been specified, and then always validate, and then either try multiple steps. Hopefully everything goes back to green. If not, at the end, you can always escalate. And now the missing piece of this is Keptn is not doing this themselves. Keptn is an orchestrator that looks and makes sure that your system is always green based on your SLOs, but it really depends and connects to your existing DevOps tools. And it's doing this through the open event standard. Right? I think that's the kind of vision that we have. We're putting your SLOs into the driving seat of your orchestration and making sure that whatever you push out is green. And whenever there's a problem in production, we bring the system back to a healthy state.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think I love those tools that give you not just a not build the infrastructure and then things how the but also when the day two things are happening and they give you the remediation because that's a really challenging. We have CI/CD tools, we have DevOps tools, then can help you build automated deployments like CI/CD environments, dev staging production. But when something happened at day two, oh, we not bother about. And actually, for the DevOps people, we really bother about day two because application when running, we need to understand how is operating, how it's performing. So I can see these as we during the conversation talk about the separation of concern. That really like the approach, and that separation of concern actually bring us to this direction where we have tooling in one place. We see Helm, Litmus, Crossplay, and Argo. We can or Keptn can orchestrate all those tools can and by the CD events, if the community agrees to the one standard of connecting to the different tools, I think Keptn is going to be a standard in the DevOps and SRE world where I look at this market. And thank you very much, Andreas. Always when talking to you, I learn about Keptn a lot. It's difficult to cover this all concept in one hour workshop. I can see there is a lot ton to more about talk about. And thankfully, we have wonderful trainer in our industry. I think Jack Word with Nana has a wonderful YouTube videos. I share the link with you. Definitely go check that out as well. And also another one, I think you read about the CNCF incubation by the Oleg Nanashev, by the another Keptn maintainer. And you should read about this blog post as well if you're thinking about what is actually the CNCF incubations mean. So it's been a pleasure talking to you as well. We'll be in touch in the more as the things happening in the Keptn world as well, and hopefully we can meet sometime the KubeCon happening this year in the North America, and we tell about each other's story in person. Live meeting has always been a pleasure when talking to you. Thank you, Andreas. Always, it's been a good talking to you. Hopefully, everybody who listened to us learned a lot. And if you have questions around any of these concepts that we talking about, if you have concerns, if you have suggestions, the feedback, Andreas is always easily and approachable either on the CDF Slack channel or you can ping him on the Twitter side as well. So both way you can connect with him or LinkedIn. He's been a very easy, approachable person on hanging out, DevOps, SRE concept. Stay safe, everyone. Stay healthy. Bye-bye. We hope to meet you again in the future with another episode. Bye-bye, everyone.